So welcome everybody to NIA's first 2020 webinar for Nano in Business. We're going to look at a really interesting topic, which hopefully there's plenty of learning for us in today. As you can see, this is a pretty interesting topic for NIA to start looking at, because although we are a global organisation, a lot of our work is within the European Union. And so for dual use of nanomaterials, this is quite a big strategic and cultural change for a lot of European actors. So I think it's very important for us to understand the background behind what we're going to talk about today and look at its relevance for nanomaterials. And of course, dual use of materials with both civilian and defence applications is very important and very relevant for nanomaterials. You know, the characteristics that they have and the properties that they give to products and processes mean that it's highly suitable for application into defence products. And of course, defence is an extremely broad word. When you look at US type of funding programs, it covers absolutely everything from remote diagnostics, sensing, coatings. It is very far. It's extremely diverse. And I think we'll see a little bit of that from today's webinar. As you will all know, the United States is the dominant global territory with regard to public funding of defence research. And so this is the first time that Europe has really looked at how it could leverage its strength and critical mass in that area as well. And it'd be very interesting to see how the programs develop within Europe. So what we're going to do today is have a look at the European Defence Fund, which is really what triggered the topic of this webinar. It's a relatively new mechanism from the European Union, and we are very pleased to see some of the actors active within it. The presentations that we will have, I will give you a short presentation to start with on what the European Defence Fund is, as unfortunately our contact in the EDF was not available today. However, he has very kindly shared with us the slides that he usually uses, and I have a summary of those slides to share with you. We will then move over to Christian, who is going to give us a presentation on the guidebook that has been developed for dual use materials. And that should be pretty interesting and help people look at where they need to get started. And then finally, we will have, I'm delighted to say, we have one of the EDF funded projects with us called Vestlife. And although it's not directly within nanomaterials, it works significantly within textiles and composites, which of course is highly relevant to nanomaterial applications. So it will give us a really interesting insight into where nanomaterials are relevant here. And at the end of the presentation session, we will keep our NIA members within the meeting to go on into a closed discussion session. So that, and usually those are pretty interesting insights into the presenters and a good opportunity to ask questions directly. The dual use topic we will continue after this webinar, as it's one that's going to run for a long time within Europe. And at our symposium on March the 18th in Brussels, we have an extended session that also includes our US member, Sarian, who is a nanomaterial producing company and who is active in defence programs over in the US. So that will be very interesting to look at a contrast between European and US approach to defence funding. Excuse my cough, I have my January illness with me. So, but of course, as you all know who have been to these webinars before, there's no such thing as a free lunch. So you're going to get a short introduction to NIA and what we do, and also the lovely people that we work with as members. So we have a fairly broad remit as an industries association, and our core mission is around the global support for a robust regulatory framework. And that's not just the EU, we look at all regulatory territories and enable our members to be best positioned for market access as possible. And this is particularly the smaller companies who don't have that capability in-house. We undertake a lot more business and scientific networking for our members these days, and you will see that in the list of activities that we have in 2020, which is coming up after this. And finally, we support the development of a global nanotechnology ecosystem. So we are involved in policy and regulatory consultations all over the world, even if it's just to try and align language and approach to regulatory frameworks so that the business barriers to entry into multiple markets are as smooth as possible. And we are growing. We're delighted to say we have over 50 members at the start of 2020, with an increasing number of nanomaterials producers joining us and sharing their experiences of business applications. So why do we support nanomaterials commercialisation? I've already mentioned the regulatory side of it, because it's very important to get that right if you want to be effective in reaching your market targets. Nanomaterials, it's also very important to build confidence and be a trusted messenger around the introduction of increasing numbers of nanomaterials into products and processes, because as we know, they are in everything that surrounds us. But yet there is not a huge level of confidence or knowledge about how you would handle them and what their impact might be throughout the life cycle of your product. So we work very hard to help build strong messages and normalise the way that nanomaterials would be considered as a potential ingredient in improved products and processes. And of course, there's a huge amount of promotional work that we need to do. You know, the only thing that binds nanomaterials together is the size. It's all materials, all products, all sectors, all geographies. It's a very big world out there for nano. So we do spend a lot of time introducing people across sectors, across countries, to try and maximise the impact of nanomaterials development. And finally, it's all about sustainability and circular economy these days, particularly in Europe. With the new Green Deal from the new European Commission, we are going to be looking much more closely at how you manage a product effectively through its full life cycle. And for nanomaterials, that's very important, so that you can be confident to reuse, recycle and dispose of your materials. And that will be a very key feature as the Horizon Europe framework comes together and the European Commission starts to implement its bold strategies for the Green Deal. So what are we doing in 2020, I hear you ask? On our regulatory side, we've got quite a lot of topics to look at this year. The number one topic in town is the January 1st deadline for REACH, and NEA has been surveying its members on who has submitted revised dossiers. If they have, how did it go? And we will look at how we can provide advice to ECHA on improving the process to allow more companies to do this effectively. So our focus really now shifts from the design of the REACH amendment updates through to their implementation. And so that's going to be a high focus for us and our members in the next sort of 5 years or so. We also can get back to the nanomaterial definition, because that was on pause while we were waiting for a new European Commission to get into place. We are looking at the extension of safety data sheets for nano, because that's a critical part of building confidence in use of materials. We have Basel Convention updates, and of course we're going to look more at the US regulatory framework this year, as there have been more communications coming out of there. Test guidelines are also an increasing topic this year, particularly as you have the EU-funded Malta project and Malta Project 2 underway, producing a lot more targeted approach to the development of nano-specific or nano-inclusive test guidelines. We can't really have any kind of update without a mention of Brexit, so we will be watching the trade negotiations very carefully on behalf of all of our members, so that people both inside and outside of the UK can be ready for changes that come. And finally, we will be looking this year also at intentionally manufactured microplastics, and that's linked very much to the next topic here, which is looking at our position paper on nanoplastics terminology. You've all seen reference to the word nanoplastics. It's being used by the Commission, by other policymakers, by agencies, and we want to make sure that it is used accurately so that it is not left out of context. So we will be launching a position paper which we developed with members over the last 2 months, and that should come out next week, and we're looking forward to helping support responsible use of terminology around the word nanoplastics. This year as well, after our very successful Nano Pavilion at the large ChemSpec trade show in Switzerland last year, we have a Nano Pavilion for members this year taking place at the Advanced Materials Show in the UK. And this allows between 6 and 8 of our members to come and showcase themselves on a large, high profile stand dedicated to nanomaterials. So we're really looking forward to that because it helps create really good critical mass in large shows so that smaller companies in particular can be well represented and have high impact business development. I've already mentioned our symposium on March the 18th. It's in Brussels. It's open to members and non-members. So we look forward to welcoming anybody into Brussels for a very close and sort of networked day with a lot of discussion around key topics. So we'd be delighted to see you there. And finally, an interesting topic that we're going to address in 2020 is advanced materials. What are they exactly? It's a very sexy phrase, but what is it? So we're going to look at how the OECD and how regulatory bodies have started to look at advanced materials, how it sits within policymaker language, and how nanomaterials producers across the board need to look at how they position themselves within the umbrella of advanced materials, because this will be very well represented within the Horizon Europe funding framework. And it's very important that nanomaterials ensure that they are right at the centre of the sort of fashion show that is advanced materials. But anyway, I think that's enough about NEA. We could get on to the real business of the afternoon. And we can look at the European Defence Fund, which is my opening presentation to you this afternoon. We have very kindly been left the slides to introduce this, and so we are learning alongside you with regard to what the European Defence Fund is and its potential relevance to nanomaterials. So what do we have? This is not a completely new programme. It's been under development for quite some time, but it's starting now to roll out in terms of activities underway. And it was developed very much in response to long-term strategic development. And these will not be unusual. These will not be new to you. You know, the European protection of European borders, the complexity of technologies has really driven the need for a more EU-level approach to this. And the markets and industry approach is one that is very familiar within Europe. You know, we're still very good at fragmenting things, and we need to also build commercial advantage out of European strengths that we haven't yet used. And as you are all highly aware of, the global competition, particularly around defence, means that Europe has to use its strengths here and focus on a more combined approach to defence research. This slide here really just highlights the difference between the EU and the US. So you can see very much how the EU is very good at fragmenting itself. We've got a lot of lower level activities and processes going on compared to the single approach taken by the US. Excuse me. We will not, of course, be replicating that. However, it shows where Europe can probably up its game to a large extent and make more effective use of its investment into defence research. So, as you can see here, the EU had a 3-line rationale behind the development of the EDF. So, an economic one is obvious, both more cost effective, but also better economic return from sort of working together more efficiently across the different member states. Strategically, it's very important. We're at a point of change for Europe in lots of different ways, and I think this is a logical step progression for the European Union to bring defence into perspective. And finally, on a political level, you will have seen this in your own headlines across Europe in different countries, and there is a political drive to be more strategic about how it works together. So the European Defence Fund is just illustrated in this slide here, and it really covers the areas in blue on the left-hand side of your slide. So it is definitely in the earlier stage of defence activities, and as you get into the implementation and capability, that's where it goes back to being a strength at national level. So the Defence Fund itself, we're looking at in the next framework a €13 billion budget, And a lot of these things will be familiar to you from previous frameworks in terms of looking at an integrated approach to how the research is undertaken. Some new things in terms of the single lump sum support, which is a good market driver for maturation of research. And disruptive technologies, that's going to be a very interesting one because Europe is very good at early stage innovation and less good at getting it into practice. So it would be super to see more disruptive technologies making their way into application and commercial development. The things that can be funded are very diverse within the European Defence Fund. So it's everything from feasibility to prototype to certification. This is not standard civil development of products and processes. There are a lot of very specific pathways that are unique to defence applications. And I think all of these things will be a valid part of projects that are underway. The eligibility for this, again, this is familiar to all of those who have been in previous frameworks. They want to have cooperation and drive collaborative advances, which is really at the core of how the European Union works. So the minimum of 3 legal entities will still apply to this. There are interests and probably changes in terms of companies that are eligible to take part. So we may have changes in collaboration and cooperation, particularly as the UK reaches its exit from the EU. And it will be very important that the IP remains within the EU. And I think we may see some changes to this as the budget for the next framework is finalised. So funding, this varies. So because this is both sort of earlier stage and applied funding, there will be from 100% funding downwards. So there is not a guarantee of 100% funding for eligible costs across all of the projects that would be funded here. The PESCO aspect of this, I made a few notes on that. That is a collaboration between most of the national armies within Europe. So at the moment it's 25 of 28, and soon it will be 24 of 28, but that will be adapted as the UK leaves the EU, and it is likely to be adapted to allow more third states to take part, such as Norway. So that's something that we can watch out as well as we're looking to build consortia for this. In terms of a quick look at the timescale for the Defence Fund development, as you can see, it kicked off in 2018, and by the time we get to January 2021, we will have the proposals fully released. But we've already had deadlines open and projects starting, so it is becoming active already. So there are essentially two different parts to the European Defence Fund. You've got the earlier restage part, which is called the preparatory action on defence research. And you can see that it sits very much to the left of your diagram here. There are a number of projects already funded there, and Vestlife, you will see, is one of the projects that we are going to hear from today. And you can see the different areas that they are looking at funding. So, standardization and interoperability will be very interesting because that's something that Europe needs to push for, again, particularly in the nanomaterials. Future and emerging disruptive technologies is a really interesting one because that's very broad and something that has a lot of potential for nanomaterials to be within. The projects that have already been funded here, you can see on the screen, and we will hear from José with the Vestlife project towards the end of the webinar. And this is all called for in your usual place in the participant portal. So those are available to go and see now. And so hopefully all of you should be familiar with how this works. Then we have the second aspect where you're getting more out of research and more into development and capability, which is the European Defence Industrial Development Programme. And again, that will be very interesting for nanomaterials producers. That seems to be earlier in its development, so they are they've allocated 500 million for this now, and it says for the period 2019 and 2020, and that has a lot more focus on getting SMEs involved and also getting collaboration across borders, which will be very interesting to see how they implement that. So there are specific rules associated for small to medium enterprise inclusion, plus the cross-border use of SMEs. So that will be very interesting to see how we can support nanomaterials producers and users across borders to bring together project applications. And you can just see here some of the topics that they have active. And again, there are lots of different areas here that could be relevant for nanomaterials, particularly when you look at innovative defence technologies. And that is a lot of SME focus in there as well. As we've already touched upon, the types of eligible action are quite broad. So they go from quite early to feasibility studies right through to qualification and certification. And so there are a lot of different aspects here to bring together when you're looking at a defence project rather than a straight sort of research project. And as we've also already mentioned, the funding rates are variable. So the closer you get to the active product for market access, the lower the funding rate will be. But of course, at that point, you should be actively getting towards market and looking at how you are going to match fund the investment that you make into your project. So as you see here, they've got calls coming out in Q1 of 2020. So we will keep our eyes peeled for those. And so we should see some quite interesting calls coming out, and we will keep all of our members informed about those and look at what we need to do in more detail. And indeed, by the time we get to our symposium in March, we should see those calls out and know exactly what they mean for nanomaterials producers and users. And again, all the calls here are available on the participant portal. So that's really the end of the introductory presentation for the European Defence Fund. I am not an expert on it. However, we will be learning how this works more as we go through 2020 and how we can support nanomaterials implementation into defence projects. So if you want to know more, certainly come to our symposium in March and stay in contact with us to see what our members are getting up to here. So I will end my presentation, as that's quite enough talking for me, and I'm going to be very pleased to hand over to our first presenter today, who is Christian. So I will allow Christian to introduce himself while I hand the screen over, and this should give us a really good insight into steps to become prepared for dual-use projects. So thanks very much, Christian.
Yeah, thank you, Claire. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to present the guidebook on dual use for companies in the framework of this webinar. Maybe a short background. This guidebook has been prepared in the framework of a project that has been commissioned by DG Research a year ago, mainly dealing with the whereabouts of dual use research in materials research. And as you may see here, I'm now starting the presentation already on the first slide. It was a project that was mainly carried out by JEEP, which is the Joint Institute for Innovation Policy, with its members Joanneum Research and VTT. And in addition, there was also the Austrian Institute of Technology and SBI from Portugal being involved. So in the next couple of minutes, I will give you a quick overview on the guidebook. And I will start here with some info on the background, the motivation, and also the target groups that are being addressed with this guidebook. So out of the research we did within this project I already mentioned, many companies, in particular SMEs, are not aware of the benefits that dual use could bring for corporate development, which means they have really up to now no clue that dual use could give them perspectives to diversify smartly and also into defense technologies. At the same time, many companies but are also not aware of the specificities of the defense market, which are a bit different from civil markets, so to speak. First, we have long time horizons and associated risks. Then there's the need for finance to mitigate those risks, because if you are a big company, be it like Thales or Rheinmetall in Germany or Leonardo from Italy, well, you can swallow this. But if you're an SME and you run out of money, meanwhile, you will be killed. So this need for finance is very important here. And then there's also a specificity about the market structure. Claire was giving in this initial presentation an overview of this fragmentation we have in Europe here. But this fragmentation has also the other side, which means in every European country, there's only mainly one client. So you have only few institutionalized clients, in maximum about 28 on the demand side, but you have quite a lot of companies that want to sell their products and services on defense procurement agencies and ministries of defense. Then also another thing is that you have specific standards for defense products. Usually they have to fulfill other requirements than civil products. They have to survive in the battlefield, and this is an important issue here. And last but not least, also specific security and confidentiality needs apply, which are different from when you engage in research development and market development in civil markets. So having said this, it's quite clear that we need a guidebook that, well, helps companies to get into this new territory when they're also willing to engage in dual-use research and later on market development. So what are the main objectives we have here? First of all, it's to provide a quick and easy guide for companies planning to engage in dual-use research and market development. So it's something very practical we have developed here. It's not a big repository, let's say, of 100 pages or so. It's really rather short, having about 25 pages and some short pages in the annex, in order to give them really a quick overview here, and especially for SMEs. Time is money, so they need a short help here at hand. Also, we are trying to offer access to free information that's available on the web. There are quite a lot of resources here, as we will see later on in my presentation, that can be consulted for free and can help you to diversify, but also to engage in clusters and other things. Then also, one major aim is here to motivate companies to acquire further knowledge on dual-use business development, consulting those free sources that I already mentioned, and also to motivate companies to engage in dual-use business development based on those tools and all those things that they can access with the guidebook. So, who is being addressed with the guidebook? Well, broadly speaking, it's all firms with dual-use potential, so materials research, but also apart from this. Of course, in our research and our development work, we mainly focused on materials research because this was kind of the thematic umbrella under which the project took place. But, well, it's mainly companies that want to develop dual-use potential, starting from the civil sector, going to the defense sector, but it could be also the possibility to go the other way around. So in terms of size of companies, of course, the main focus is SMEs. The big companies, we had quite a few of them in consultative workshops where we presented and further developed this guidebook. Well, they know how the game is running, so they do not need such additional help. But SMEs, that's a different story. They are really in need of help here, and the same holds true also for mid-caps to some extent. So now I will give you a quick overview on the guidebook, first starting with kind of what's the basic concept of the guidebook, how it's being structured, and then later on I will give you a few examples to provide you a flavor of what the real content here is. Okay, at the center of the guidebook is kind of an initial checklist. It's a decision tree that helps you to navigate through the whole development process from some project idea for research that might have dual-use potential to market development. This checklist is, or this decision tree is then tied to specific sections that can be accessed. We'll have a PDF version where you have then active links to do this, and the printed copy, of course, you have to browse through the whole document. Well, it's not feasible to do it otherwise. The whole thing is also being complemented by an introductory section that gives basic definitions on dual use and also some instructions how to use the guidebook and the basic motivation here. So what sections are we talking about? Let us have a quick overview here. So it's a few of them, as you may see here, starting with dual-use technologies. So that's kind of what kind of technologies would qualify, which would have a big potential. Then it's about business development and business ideas. That would be the starting point for diversification, be it into the defense sector or be it in the civil sector if you are situated in the defense sector. Then there's a section on diversification strategies, how to bring them about, how to develop them. On market intelligence, because this is highly needed to do the relevant decisions here. Supporting ecosystems. You need to, if you are really entering the territory of defense, you need such a kind of supporting ecosystem for the reasons already presented in the basic motivation slide. Standards, IPRs, which means particular patents. Finance, very important for quite a lot of steps. And the contracting with defense procurement authorities. And furthermore, entering defense value chains, which means starting to negotiate with large system suppliers, becoming supplier there. And of course, export controls, which holds true both when going abroad, that means doing business outside of the European Union, but for a couple of products also inside the European Union. So that's the main sections that are being covered. And now I will just give you a brief overview on this initial checklist in order to show you how the overall logic works. So as you may see here, we have a couple of steps in this decision tree that you have to go through, and you may be in different positions when looking at this. If you are really starting from scratch, you will start at the top side of the decision tree, which means I want to do a business, I want to do a research or development project with dual-use potential. This would mean that you need to go to the section technologies and the section finance in order to consult relevant resources in order to support your decision. So that means EDF would be among one of the sources that's being presented here, while technologies, there's a couple of lists and other resources that could be consulted in order to support your decision. A second step would be then, I want to diversify my company's product portfolio with the help of dual-use technology. So if you have already some results out of a project, you might think of that could help you to develop further business. This would be this kind of step. So here you would need to go to the section business development. You need also diversification strategies, and also, of course, a section on market development. Now you will see there are two branches, because as we are sort of covering both directions when it comes to dual-use market development, be it from the defense sector to the civil one or the other way around. So if you look here at the left-hand branch, you can see I want to develop my company into the defense market, which is a more tricky thing actually, especially if you have no knowledge about the specificities here. So here you would be advised to go to the section supporting ecosystems. I will give a brief overview on this section later on. Go to a section standards, IPR, and finance. If you are a defense company and you are planning to go to markets with civil applications, it would be mainly a section of IPR and also market intelligence here, of course. Then, if we stay on the left-hand branch, which is civil to defense market, the next logical step you need to decide upon is here: do you want to do business in the EU defense market, or do you want to do this outside of the EU? If you want to do this in the EU defense market, then you would need to go to the section contracting with procurement agencies, but also getting into value chains. The last step, of course, so it's if you want to go abroad, then you need to consult the section export control. But as I already mentioned, there are inside EU regulation a few products that also qualify for export controls inside European Union. Okay, so now I will just give you a flavor how the different sections I introduced are being structured. Well, actually, every section has 4 subsections, so to speak, starting with why is this important. So it's providing an introductory text about the motivation for this specific theme that's being addressed in the section, but also some basic info. Then we have this part. What else do I need to know? That's more detailed info on the subject. I will show it in 2 examples later on. What should I do next? That's checklists and action points. You have the opportunity to go through them. This is first help to develop internal actions and internal projects. Yeah? And then there's a section where can I deepen my knowledge, and there those resources that you can consult for free are being presented. There's quite a lot of different things we found in the internet that could support here. As I already said, this is information for free, so you do not need to do some training with some consultants. It's really, you can download it at those places we provided URLs for, and work further on with those toolboxes and resources. Okay, as I already mentioned, I prepared 2 sort of shortened examples for these sections. And here, this first example is setting out this diversification strategy for reuse, which is one of the steps we have seen also with the decision tree, and also with this overview of the themes that are being covered. So again, you can see here on the left-hand side the different 4 elements. Named a bit differently. It's motivation, basic info, action, further info, but it's sort of it's representing the same category. And this shorter presentation here is just for the sake of being able to put this on 1 page to have a really good overview. So motivation is here. As I said, defense companies can seek new business opportunities in either going from civil markets to defense markets or the other way around. Then, as I already said, with the basic info, there are different routes to diversification. There are things like concentric diversification or conglomerate diversification. And also, of course, there are things like defensive or offensive diversification. Lots of different categories can also find the resources that we provide. And then, of course, when it comes to action, there are first point is here quite naturally make yourself familiar with the diversification strategy concepts, but also collect intelligence on promising markets and on existing regulations and standards and things like that. So it's also directly referring to the section on market intelligence I also mentioned earlier in my presentation. And last but not least, develop your diversification plan and identify most promising areas. So I just provided here a very concrete example of further info that could be available. A UK-based consulting company, QI3 Limited, developed a guiding document for diversification of defense companies into civil markets about 6 years ago. And well, this document can still be downloaded under the URL that's presented here. But of course, in this section, further info, there are also lots of other resources that could be consulted. This is just an sort of anecdotal example to show what you could expect. As I already said, I also prepared a second sort of example for one of the thematic sections. Now it's mainly about supporting ecosystems. So again, it's having here the same structure. For the sake of presentability, it's really on 1 page and it's sort of shortened. So what's the motivation for integrating into a supporting ecosystem? Well, we already mentioned in the presentation these specifics of the defense sector that are there, and well, they quite clearly lead to the need of supporting partners. So if you are new in those markets, you will need them because it's a different world. So clusters and regeneration networks are quite obviously providing plenty of opportunity to find such supporting partners. Well, when we look now at more in-depth info, first thing that we could provide to you as an interested reader of the guidebook is there are already by now 58 European clusters in the category aerospace, vehicles and defense. And those clusters can be found in the European Cluster Collaboration Platform with additional info on the clusters, contact details of the cluster managers. So a firm would just need, and this is already in action, check whether it would be in one of those regions where the cluster is situated. But there's another thing that firms might like to learn here, which is there's a European network of defense-related regions, which has been initiated by European Commission, and namely by DG GROW. I know it's the NDR, and this has been done for the sake of developing regional and interregional networks that could be also able to support firms in absorbing the funding that will be available in the future in the framework of the EDF. So this is kind of a complementary action to those things that Claire presented in this presentation on the EDF and the funding opportunities there. So what would be actions, as I already said? Check for regional clusters, or whether your region would be one of those members of the NDR. Then contact the cluster or the member that's being that's representative in the NDR network. And if this is not the case, there's still another opportunity to get help from the outside, which is almost every European member country has a national defense industry association, which helps companies in the defense sector, but also in the security sector, to tackle with relevant standards, regulations, with the specificities of calls by agencies or tenders by the MODs and things like that. So further info, that could help companies here is, of course, there's at the EDA website, there's a list of national defense industry associations that could be easily consulted. And well, one only needs to pick up this list and to check who would be the relevant institution in the relevant member country. And then one could contact well, the relevant person here and see whether one could become member or could take part in workshops that those associations usually are providing. Well, with those two examples, I'm almost done with my presentation. There's just a couple of things I would like to mention here at the end. The guidebook is currently being finalized, which means not content-wise. That's already has been done in the last year. It's now currently being layouted, which should be ready with the end of the month. After approval by European Commission, it will be also available to the public, which means it will be available at our project website, but also very likely at websites from the European Commission. So therewith, I'm done, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks very much indeed, Christian, and we look forward to the guide becoming officially available and also finding out a little bit more about it at our symposium in March. Yep. So what I'm going to do now is hand over to our next presenter for the afternoon, who is José. So do you want to introduce yourself, José, who is going to introduce us to the project Vestlife, which is looking at European defence funding in action. So we're looking forward to finding out what the type of project is, how they got involved, and what the likely impact is as a result of the project. So take it away, José. José, you're on mute, so you need to unmute your microphone.
Sorry.
That's fine.
Okay, thank you very much for your introduction. My name is José Manuel Ramos. I am the project manager of the International Project Department in ITEX. ITEX is a research institute focused on textile. I mean that it means that we work for the textile companies located in our region. So the owner of ITEX is a cluster of companies, and they decide what are the research lines and what must be our SRA and so on and so on. Let me give you some data about ITEX. Sorry, because it's not okay. We are now working here in ITEX around 300 people. 250 located here in our headquarters in Alcoy, it's in the southeast of Spain, and 50 more people spread around the world. So we have several venues all around the world, because one of the services that we provide to the companies, sometimes our companies are producing, or our customers are producing in Asia and in these places. So we have people there providing services to the companies. In the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the mix of income that we have. We are really proud about this picture, because only 12% of our income come from public funding. So most of our income can directly for contract with companies. So I like to show this slide in all my presentation, because for the majority of the people, or for most of the people, they think that the textile are only for clothing, but under our point of view, or for us, textile is much more than clothing. We are in the medical textile. We are in many different sectors. So we have a SRA, as I told you before. So we have 4 pillars for making our research. We had two different models to work with companies and to develop. When we are in a low maturity technology, we spend around the 10% of our income in making internal projects for maturing to develop technologies. And we spend this around 3 million euros in internal projects, and subcontracting universities and so on for to mature our technology. And then once we are in the TRL4, we start making business with this new technology. So we try to sell the technology, or to transfer this knowledge to the companies. We made a lot of contract with companies in order to sell prototypes, or to develop, or to make the proof of market prototypes and this kind of thing in companies. And also we support companies in the participation in Horizon 20, EDF, and this kind of Europe programs. That's all about ITEX, and I will give you an introduction about how a research center that was focused only in civil application has moved progressively to a project oriented to defense. Before 2013, we were working for mainly in testing and certification for Spanish companies. So all the PPEs producer companies that sell product to the Spanish policemen and the firemen and so on, they contract us services for develop new product and these kind of things. So the field of knowledge was ballistic mainly. We developed several prototypes in order to make, we aiming to increase the ballistic protection of bullets vests and these kind of things. Also focus on chemical protection, on PPEs that are able to provide chemical protection to the wearer. So, but in 2013, we start working for the EDA, the European Defence Agency. This milestone opened the door to the defense application. So since 2013, we are working for several. We were working for several projects for the EDA. 2 of them dealing with ballistic, another one dealing with the development of new sensor based on quantum dots, and also project related with comfort and so on. So in 2017, as Claire told you before, and the European Commission, in collaboration with the EDA, launched the preparatory action for defense and research. So this is the preparatory action. So this is a program that is used to test and validate the future EDF funds that will be launched next year. So so we apply for one of these projects, and we are running now one of the projects that is funded under the preparatory action for defense and research. So why we are running this Vestlife project? So as I told you before, during the we had several contracts with the EDA, sorry. And one of these contracts was focused on the assessing the feasibility of producing a ballistic vest for the armies all around Europe. So in this project, we developed a 3D textile in order to increase the degree of protection of these bulletproof bags. So we did this project for the EDA, and we obtained a really nice result. So I don't know if you're familiar with this kind of solution, but just in few words, the ballistic vests are made of fabric made of Aramid fabric. So the Aramid has a really good properties, and they can stop a bullet without penetration. So you need a few layers of Aramid, and you can avoid the penetration of the bullet through the fabric. But the problem that this system has is that the bad faith deformation of this fabric is so high. So the bullet doesn't penetrate the protection system, but the back face deformation of the system is going to kill you. So you have to be the solution is to add a layer behind the Aramid to reduce this bad face deformation. So we developed a 3D textile in order to avoid this or to reduce this bad face deformation. So we achieved the result of the project were that we can remove layer of Aramid without losing protection. So at the end of the day, you are reducing the cost and you are reducing the weight of the system. So it was the concept of our previous project. So then in 2016, at the end of 2016, the EDA launched the open call, the PIDI. One of the topics that they launched, they used a similar approach that the Commission used in the Horizon 2020 project. So they launched a topic within the participant portal, and we found this topic that it was quite related with our previous project performed for the EDA. So we prepared a new proposal, and we did a new project called Vestlife. In this project, we are dealing not only with soft protection, but also with hard protection. Or what is that? What is does it mean? I mean, when you are using soft protection, you are only use fabric to attain a level of protection. But when you are dealing with a rifle or another kind of weapons, that you need to include in your vest ceramic material. So in this project, we developed both soft protection and hard protection. So in one hand, we developed the 3D fabric textile in order to reduce the back face deformation of the soft bags, and we also develop, or we are also working with auxetic material. Auxetic material is technology because it's a technology. This material are material that has a poison ratio negative. This means that when you pull the material from instead of shrinking in the central part in the middle, they expand. So they have exactly the opposite behavior to the common material. And this, under the theoretic point of view, this is good for ballistic. So we are making auxetic composite in our project in order to reduce the back face deformation of the hard plate for ballistic protection. So this is a picture of one of the prototypes that we are preparing in our project. So the yellow part is the auxetic composite, and the dark part is the ceramic material. So the bullet impacting theoretically, the bullet is going to impact in the dark part, in the ceramic material, and the yellow part is going to reduce the bad fate deformation of the this kind of material. So to do that, we create a really complex methodology. We have many different technologies. We are dealing with raw material, we are dealing with processing technology, because to produce this auxetic material is not only about material, it's also about processing technologies. It's not easy to make a fiber or fabric a thermoset composite made of with this auxetic structure, and also then we include some kind of sensor to monitor the chemical compound that are in the ambient and so on. So we have many things to do in the project, and to do that, to have a good consortium and to collaborate is quite important. So cooperation is a must. Here we are three research centers, two ITEX and CITEB, that are special. We are focused on textile. Then we have a composite company in Finland, and also we have a company dealing with ceramic, and another research center dealing with the R&D provider in the ceramic part of the project. This is a brief overview of our project, and I would like to share with you the lesson learned during this time. So one of the more important things that you have to take into account if you want to work in the defense sector is the requirement. So as Christian said before, they need to survive in the battlefield, and they have a really strict requirement. And also, it's not easy to get this requirement. Sometimes the requirement that they need for the product or for the capabilities, they are classified. So sometimes it's not easy to work with these people. So one of the things that I would like to tell you is that try to engage your MOD, or try to engage a practitioner in your projects, because they are going to provide you this requirement, and it's quite useful. If not, in the opposite case, you will have a lot of problem to set up a proper objective in your project or in your development. Then sometimes you have to deal with restricted information. So if you plan to work in the defense sector, please apply to your personal security clearance or your facility security clearance. It's quite important. This is something that changes depending on the country. So in some countries, it's quite easy to get this kind of clearance, but in another country, there are a lot of bureaucracy, and it could take years in getting these kind of things. So please, it's quite important. Last but not least, it's quite important also the ethical and legal implication of this research. So there are companies that are specialized in ethics. So try to engage in your project this kind of profile, because it's quite important to have a proper result in your project. Another important thing is to be familiar with the wording. The people from the armies and the people from the EDA and the people even from the Commission likes a lot this kind of acronyms. PESCO, EDIP, EDF, TBB, OSRA, CADR, ELSA. These are the kind of things that they use. If you go to a meeting with them, you need to be familiar with them, because if not, you are not going to be able to understand anything in the meeting. So please try to take into account this kind of thing. Also, it's quite important to tell you, because I think that Christian told you something about that at the end of the day you only have one customer, and this customer is the army, and the army is quite familiar with a really big player. They usually contract or they usually purchase material to big player because they want to preserve the autonomy of the country. So it's a really hard market for SMEs. So EDF and EDIT is an excellent opportunity for SMEs and for RTOs. So if you want to work in defense, now is your opportunity, because without this kind of funding instrument will be almost impossible, because the market is dominated by big players. Dual use, I'm not going to go into detail because Christian did previously a presentation, but this is the definition that the European Commission, the official definition of the European Commission of dual use. To be honest, is something that is confused to me, but this is the official definition of the Commission. And then another important tip or another important information that you had to take into account is the different documents that are circulating around, or the different program and the different things. So we have the PESCO. This is a program that member states are using to basically to develop capabilities. The funds come from the countries, from the member state, but the secretary or the management of this program is made by the EDA. So it's a really interesting program. It's a program focused on capabilities. Then we have the EDF. This is a more focus on low mature technologies, on low TRL technologies, and will be launched hopefully in 2021. And also we have a really interesting document that is one document that the EDA is producing every year. Is the Critical Annual Review in Defense. So this document analyzes the capabilities that the armies around Europe need for the future years. So this document can be used to, let's say, to orient your R&D, because you can find there what are the needs of the armies. And EDF is trying to coordinate and to avoid duplicities and to avoid the conflict of interest between the different mechanisms that are now already in place. That's all from my side. Thank you very much for your attention, and hopefully the information that I am providing you will be helpful for you.
Thank you very much indeed. That was an extremely useful presentation from all aspects, and it was extremely interesting to see your lessons learned, because I think often, obviously, when you're working in early and even applied research, you are very familiar with all of the actors in your particular area, and this is not just going outside a technology or an application, but it's going outside your comfort zone entirely in terms of the types of organisations that are going to be users of your technology. So there's a huge language change to come, and so I think it's not something that you would do lightly or opportunistically in looking for proposal opportunities. It sounds like quite a significant strategic decision from an organisation to take part, because the level of effort to learn what is required is very high. But very interesting. Thank you very much indeed. That brings us to the end of our official public presentations today. So I'm going to switch off the recording for the webinar so that you can catch up with this also on YouTube. So thanks very much and goodbye to all our YouTubing people.